Good evening. Got a fun story for you tonight. I've been unable to record a Fireside fairy tale for a few weeks because, thanks to the English weather, it was either tipping down rain or dry but incredibly windy. But fortunately, it's a pleasant evening and I've finished my chores. The kids are in bed. It's a beautiful night, although because it's almost midsummer, it's nearly 10 o'clock and it's still light out and it'll be light for another hour. But the story that I have for you is the earliest printed version of Jack and the Beanstalk. And I got the idea to do this one because my 4-year-old came home from preschool with a little bean that she'd planted in a cup after hearing this story in class. And I wondered, what was the origin of this one? And I have to say, this one's pretty wild. It's very funny. I would say maybe listen to this one first before you read it to your kids. There's nothing really inappropriate in it, but kind of PG-13 humor, we'll call it. And it was printed in a book called Round About Our Coal Fire, or Christmas Entertainments. It was published in 1734, and it's this crazy collection of funny stories. It has like kitchen chemistry so that you could, convince people that you're a conjurer. It talks about lighting farts on fire and then they burn blue. And that blew my mind because I heard that urban legend on the playground as a kid. And I thought, my gosh, 300 years ago, they were saying the same thing. Now, of course, I would never be so inappropriate as to verify the truth of such a claim. But if you have done scientific experimentation in this area, perhaps you can let me know if there's any truth to it. But this is the story of Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean. And of course, because this is an 18th century story, it starts with a 1-paragraph spoiler. Oh, but before we get going, I've got to get my marshmallows started. Now, a couple of you had pointed out that using a metal skewer, it was the cause of some of my problem of losing marshmallows into the fire. Check. Oh no. I lost my marshmallow. The thing is, a metal skewer warms up, so it really gets the middle of that marshmallow nice and melted. But yeah, it also makes it far more likely that a distracted storyteller will allow the marshmallow to drop into the fire. So I was out in the woods going for a walk, and I found this beautiful piece of English oak, and I saw the shape of it, and I thought, that is just perfect for toasting a marshmallow. So I whittled the tip down here. And let's give it a go and see if it helps me tell a story and not lose a marshmallow, because it'll get stuck on the spike there as opposed to slipping off into the fire. Wish me luck. Enchantment demonstrated in the story of Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean. Giving a particular account of Jack's arrival at the castle of giant Gog-Magog, his rescuing 10,000 ladies and knights from being broiled for the giant's breakfast, jumping through keyholes, and at last how he destroyed the giant and became monarch of the universe. Gaffer Spriggins, who was an acute old farmer, who could leer of one eye and crack a joke, began to tell about a comical lad of his family of the name of Spriggins, for he admired every one of his name because he had no children of his own. And this boy's name was Jack, as we shall call him now. "Good folks," says Gaffer Spriggins, "there never was such a dirty, lazy, tatterdemalion dog as Jack in the world. He was elevated in his garret o' nights, and had the curie of small beer in the kitchen o' days, with an old enchantress for his grandmother and companion. When I mention his apartment, I ought in justice to let you know that the house was no more than a hovel or cottage. It consisted but of 2 rooms, if we may call them so, for really the upper apartment, which was the next story to the ground floor, was next to the thatch, in which place he had often the benefit of contemplation. For though he was a smart large boy, his grandmother and he laid together, and between whiles the good old woman instructed Jack in many things, and among the rest, 'Jack,' says she, 'as you are a comfortable bedfellow to me, I must tell you, I have a bean in my house which will make your fortune. You shall be richer than an emperor. You shall have the whole world at your command, and as you now grow strong and lusty, I design to give it thee, my boy, one day or other.' 'Oh,' says Jack, 'dear grandmother, give me now that bean. that I may try how rich I can be, and then how much I shall love my dear grandmother." "No, child," says she. "Should I do that, you would grow rich and turn rake, and you would never think of your poor grandmother again." Rake's a word we don't use much anymore, but it kind of refers to a sort of unprincipled and somewhat wild young man, maybe dashing, but a bit, unwise with his money, like the kind of guy who'd be really fun to go on a date with, but is definitely not boyfriend material. "But, sirrah," says she, "if I was to know you would play such tricks, I'd whip your little Narcy Parcy for you." "Nay," says Jack, "grandmother, don't hurt me." "No," answers the grandmother, "you lusty boy, you know I love you too well to hurt you. I love you as becomes me, and you ought to take notice on it." And so Jack made no words about the matter. In the morning, as Jack was making his grandmother's fire, Puss, scratching among the ashes, clawed out the enchanted bean, which his grandmother had dropped out of her leathern purse by accident. "Odds bud," says Jack. That's a bit of minor blasphemy, kind of like saying, geez or gosh or darn instead of the real thing. And odds bud is a more polite way of saying God's blood. "I'll set it in our garden and see what it'll come to, for I always loved beans and bacon." And then what was wonderful? The bean was no sooner put into the ground, but the sprout of it jumped out of the earth and grew so quick that it gave Jack a fillip on the nose and made him bleed furiously. In he runs to his grandmother, crying out, "Dear grandmother, save me, I am killed." "No," says she, "I now have only time to tell you. My enchantment will be broke in an hour's time. I know it, you have got my bean, and this impertinence of yours will occasion my being transformed. Yet if I am able, I will sufficiently thrash your jacket." "Go get him, Grandma." But away runs Jack, and up the bean he climbs, and the old woman after him with the birch broom in her hands. The bean was then about a mile high, and by that time she got at it, Jack was straddled up near half a mile. And through her vengeance and ill nature, not being able to reach the boy, she fell down in a fit for a time, and as soon as her hour was out, was turned into a monstrous toad, and crawled into some neighboring mud or cellar in her way to the shades. The shades refers to the souls of those who are condemned to hell. But Jack went on in his gallop, though the bean grew more than a mile an hour. In truth, the bean grew 40 miles high, and while it was growing, some little towns were built upon the leaves as he went up for him to refresh himself at. He calls at one for a pot of ale, at another for some bread and cheese, and at another, which was near the giant's castle, for what he could get. This had a very promising aspect, for the sign was as big as any on Ludgate Hill. You'll notice that all of the place names in this story that are real come from London. Ludgate Hill is one of the big commercial districts in London. Here he thought to rest for a time, and goes in strutting like a crow in a gutter. I love that image. "What have you to eat, landlord?" says he. "Everything in the world, sir," says the landlord. "Why then," says Jack, "give me a neck of mutton and broth." "Alas," says the landlord, "tomorrow is market day. How unfortunate it is. I cannot get you a neck of mutton tonight if it was to save my soul." "Well then, get me something else," says Jack. "Have you any veal?" "No, indeed, sir, not at present, but there is a fine calf fatting at Mr. Jenkinson's that will be killed on Saturday next." "But have you any beef in your house?" says Jack. "Why, truly, sir," says the landlord, "if you had been here on Monday last, I believe, though I say it that should not say it, you never saw so fine a sirloin of beef as we had, and plum pudding too, which the justices who dined here and their clerks and constables entirely demolished. And though I got nothing by them, yet their company was a credit to my house." "Zoons," says Jack, "have you nothing in the house?" Zoons is another minor socially acceptable swear. It refers to God's wounds. "I am hungry, I am starving, but I hear a cock crow, and from thence I am sure you have some poultry. Kill one of them and broil it." "Yes, sir," says the landlord. "But that cock is the squire's. He would not take 40 guineas for it." "Well then," replied Jack, "you may kill a hen or a chicken." "Oh, Lord, sir, I have no chickens," answers the landlord, "and the 2 hens I have belong to the gamecock, for they have incubated, as I may say, their eggs a fortnight, but I believe we shall have chickens a week hence." "Have you no eggs in the house?" says Jack. "No, sir, indeed," answers the landlord, "but nest eggs, which we make of chalk." "Why then," says Jack, "what the devil have you got?" "Why, to tell you the truth, sir, I don't know that I have anything in the house to eat. For the squire and his huntsman called here this morning and devoured what we had, all our bacon, all our cheese, and all our bread. But I could have got you some fine trouts from the miller's, only a little before you came in, he sent all his fish up to Sir John's." "Why then," says Jack, "I find I must go to bed supperless." "Aye, master," answers the host. Now Jack might have to go to bed supperless, but I do not have to tell this story without my marshmallow, which is now nicely toasted. Not quite as gooey as it might have been with a metal skewer, but none of this marshmallow has fallen into the fire. I've been pleased to see how many others of you are members of the Society of Slow Toasters. Takes more work, but it's worth it. Well, now let's get back to poor old Jack and see if he can get anything to eat or drink. "Then give me some drink," says Jack. "That I can do, for I have just brewed. And if you love new drink, I can fit you to a tittle, for it has not been in the tun half an hour." Oh no! So the landlord's offered Jack some beer, but it's only just been brewed, which means there's no alcohol in it, and it would taste funny anyway. It would be way too sweet because none of the sugars have been fermented out, so Jack's really being tortured. Thus was poor Jack plagued by the enchantment of his grandmother, who was resolved to lay him under her ill tongue so long as her power lasted. But just as he fell in with this starving prospect, off goes the top of the house. The host was turned into a beautiful lady, and in pops a dozen pretty youths, dressed like pages in green satin, laced with silver and white feathers in their caps, each of them mounted upon an hobby horse, finely bedecked with ribbons, tinsel, and feathers. They dismounted immediately, and in full chorus most harmoniously addressed themselves to Jack, saluting him with the titles of Sovereign Lord of the Manor and Invincible Champion. "'Tis this instant, great sir, that your supposed grandmother, the Queen of Pamunkey, has taken her passage to the shades. Her enchantment is broke, and we bring you the full power of possessing all the pleasures you desire. The fair lady that stands before you is Empress of the Mountains of the Moon. Young as she seems to be, was your grandmother's black cat, and by enchantment has worn that shape 400 years. It was she that put it in your mind to plant this wonderful bean by scratching in the ashes, and she is now entirely at your highness's disposal, whether she shall live or die. You have 1,000 Jack Catches now attending you without, with halters and hatchets to make an end of her when your honor pleases to direct her execution, or else you have a fiery dragon gaping for her, if you give but once the signal for her death." Jack Catch refers to a famous 17th century executioner, or infamous rather, who was especially brutal or incompetent in dispatching his duties. And so till quite recently, an executioner or hangman would be sort of just generally referred to as a Jack Catch. "This box, great sir, bears you the absolute power over her, over us, over Old Scratch, or Nicholas the Ancient. Your grandmother, illustrious sir, when she found the loss of her bean and the shortness of her power, invoked an assembly of inquietudes to attend you, and so transformed this miracle of nature into the host you have been talking with." I really like that phrase. I'm going to have to use that with my kids. Clean your room, or I will invoke an assembly of inquietudes against you. "Why, in troth," says Jack, "I thought it was a woman by filling me so full of expectation." "But, gentlemen, have you got any bread and cheese in your pockets? For I am bloody hungry." I love it. So Jack's just found out he's got all this insane power and this gorgeous woman who'll do whatever he says. And he's just like, has anybody got some bread and cheese? But since it is all enchantment, as I begin now to find by the alteration of my body, I feel sprinklings of generosity flow in my veins for my grandmother's dear puss, who has so often purred about me. I have nobleness of spirit to excuse my innocent landlord, and gratitude enough to take the fair lady to my arms. Very generous of you, Jack. It requires no more than, exalted monarch, say the pages, but to put on the ring enclosed in that box, and you will instantly possess 5 wishes. And on top of the ring, your highness will find a marble red stone given to your grandmother by the king of Strombolo. If you are engaged in combat, turn the stone to the north, and you may conquer giants, dragons, and basilisks. And while you keep it to the south, you will flow in plenty and enjoy everything else you desire. Is that all you have to say? Says Jack. Yes, and please your honor, replied the pages, and then put on the ring. At which moment the remaining part of the inn was changed with a terrible crack into a delightful summer house or pavilion, where a table was spread with the most elegant dishes, and the sideboard furnished with the richest wines. This, says Jack, pleases me above all things in the world. It is my first wish completely. But then he espied his lady to be stark naked. I wish, madam, says Jack, you was as well clothed as the greatest queen in the world, when immediately she was adorned in the gayest princely robes. I'll admit, when I first read that did not go the direction that I thought it would. Now, says Jack, I wish for some good music. And this might seem frivolous, but keep in mind that today we're all walking around with these phones in our pockets that can play any music from any recording, anywhere, anytime, on demand. But being able to hear good music 300 years ago would have been something really, really special. And in an instant, down came a dozen or 2 of excellent fiddlers. He then wished them to play the Black Joke, and so they went on for an hour till he had crammed his carcass. The Black Joke is a real song. It was very popular with the Navy. That's all the information I'm going to give you about that song. If you want to find out how dirty it is, you can look it up yourself. And for the 5th wish, he wished to be in bed with his fine lady. And as the laws of enchantment order it, a wish is no sooner thought on but executed. So were our couple enchanted into a crimson velvet bed, embroidered with gold and pearls, the room illuminated with 100 wax perfume lights placed in glass sconces, the marble tables covered with jessamine and orange flowers, and the small ones made of mahogany and other fine wood, adorned with pyramids of sweetmeats and refreshing drams, from the true Barbados citron to the humble gin. Neither was there wanting a chamber pot on each side of the bed and a brace of close stools in separate closets, for fear of the worst, by which convenience lay the works of several eminent modern authors by way of wipe. So they do this lovely scene with this awesome velvet bed. It sounds so romantic and luxurious. So then there's chamber pots and close stools are those padded chairs with, it looks like basically like an armchair with a cushion, except there's a hole in the middle so that your number 2s can go down into the chamber pot. And this is meant to be funny, but it's also a sign of convenience, because most people wouldn't have been able to, have this inside. You've got his and hers closets for the close stools, which means that this couple don't have to do their business in front of each other. But I love the jab that this comedy writer is throwing at modern authors, saying that the only stuff their writing is good for is as toilet paper. I should have observed that when the princess was conjured into this wonderful apartment, she was attended by 12 damsels clothed in silver tissue, who flew to her assistance mounted upon as many rosebuds. These were followed by an impudent shoeboy, whose business it was to clean her ladyship's shoes against the morning, so that there was nothing wanting to complete the happiness of the illustrious couple. In short, the attendants withdrew, and we leave them now to play their rentum-scantum tricks till the next morning. Rentum-scantum means kind of like rumble-tumble. I may add that Jack had so much business upon his hands that night that he fell asleep in the morning and dreamt a dream, in which the patronates of the enchantment appeared to him, and after having touched him and his princess 3 times with a wand, struck out of their memories all thoughts of what they had been, and confirmed them in princely graces. Then whisking her wand 3 times over her head, whispered Prince John of his progress to the top of his beam, and how he should come to the castle of giant Gogmagog, by whom Himself and his princess should be favorably received and entertained for 3 days without danger, but he must be sure to keep the stone in his ring inclining to the north, and his princess on his north side, that then he should be in seeming great danger of his life, as well as his princess. But by turning the stone of his ring under the bent of his finger, the princess should immediately change into a basilisk, and kill all that were in the reach of her eyes except himself. And then, as soon as he could assure himself of safety, it was only to turn up his ring as it had been before, and then the princess would resume her shape, and he become master of all the giant's treasure. In the meantime, she placed an enchanted fly upon the princess's left breast, to convey her as a flying horse would do, when she happened to be weary with climbing, and so departed. Then Prince John began to rub his eyes, and stretching himself with a yawn or two, turned to his dear princess, who had just waked from the same dream he himself had. There was the fly upon the breast of the lady, which they carefully took off and put into a little gold cage, which they found placed on a table by them. And after a merry turn or two, they disposed themselves for getting up, and were immediately attended with pages and virgins. They had a delightful breakfast, were dressed sumptuously, and set out for a walk toward the enchanted castle, the pages leading their hobby horses in their hands, with one of an extraordinary kind and workmanship. For the prince and the virgins had each hold of their rosebuds, and as for the princess's enchanted fly, she had hung it in its cage to the chain of her watch. In their progress it happened that the company by means of the enchanted air had got appetites like horses, and by agreement the prince and princess sat down under the side of an hill, covered with orange trees and myrtles, the banks adorned with cowslips, primroses, hyacinths, and violets. Before them was a purling stream, and the woods resounded with the harmonious notes of nightingales, linnets, canary, and other fine singing birds, when on a gentle breeze were wasted 100 cupids, each bearing a salver of gold, furnished with the richest and most delicate meats, while on the other hand the trouts, salmons, carp, and other inhabitants of the stream leaped upon the banks, with a proper supply of nectar, ambrosia, burgundy, champagne, hermitage, frontignac, and tokay wines. I don't know anything about wine. I probably said some of those wrong. Not forgetting a dram or two for the virgins of honor. So the flowers that were mentioned earlier in that passage, those all come into bloom at the same time, usually in kind of like late March to mid-April, so we can say that this story happens in the springtime. The prince and princess were delightfully regaled, whilst the zephyrs attended them with refreshing air, and when their company had satisfied themselves, the remainder of the entertainment vanished. And as it is not proper to walk much after a hearty repast, the prince judged it convenient to ride the rest of the way toward the castle. And now no sooner was the fly let out of its cage, but itself and all the hobby horses and rosebuds were changed into palfreys, adorned with the richest trappings, and away they go in the grandest manner, passing by many knights and ladies, and were informed that there were many more before them, when on a sudden they heard a voice cry out, for they could hear many miles farther than anyone else, "Fee, faw, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. Whether he be alive or dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread." But this did not trouble either the prince or his lady or attendants. They all knew they had safety enough in their hands, and galloped on till they arrived at the Castle of Wonders, when they soon espied the giant Gog-Magog, who was picking his teeth with a great tree. Gog-Magog is a figure from British legend. He is said to have been a giant who lived in Cornwall, and he actually shows up in some fairly early stories written about Britain. His toothpick case was such another thing as the Monument in London. He had a bowl of punch as big as St. Paul's Church, and the cup that he drank out of was about the size of the dome of St. Paul's. For his tobacco pipe, he had the exact model of the pyramidical building near the waterside in Suffolk, where the damaged tobacco is burnt, and his tobacco stopper was like the water engine belonging to the York Buildings Company. The water engine was the world's first steam engine, and it was quite a marvel. It was enormous, and it filled this entire warehouse. And his tobacco box was about the size of Westminster Hall, But, however, he rose up when the prince and his retinue appeared, and saluted them, bid them welcome, and offered them the best entertainment he could give them, whilst the prince, for safety's sake, turned the stone of his ring to the north, for he had never seen so huge a man before. They were introduced into the castle through the richest apartment imaginable, and what was extraordinary, the great giant shrunk into a common size, and appeared like other men. The furniture was vastly rich, the attendants without number, and the equipage magnificent, and nothing was wanting to entertain our illustrious couple with splendor befitting their rank. The gardens were splendid as those at Versailles, the parks of vast extent, and in a word, so well furnished with all sorts of game that no other could parallel them, which pleased the young couple extremely, knowing full well they would be soon at their own disposal. But they had now passed near the 3 days with the giant, who grew desperately in love with the princess, and resolved to have her at any rate, even at the expense of devouring her husband, which he could have done at a mouthful well enough if he had been a common man. But enchantment is a great help to men in such distress, and the prince and his lady went to bed well satisfied. They were no sooner laid down on their pillows, but they heard a mighty sobbing and moaning of many virgins sighing and grieving at their hard fortunes, that the giant was to make a breakfast of them the next morning. Now, you must know, the stone in the prince's ring being turned to the south, he could see and know what he pleased, and having consulted with the princess about the destruction of the giant, "My dear," says he, "shall I make the proof of changing you into a cockatrice or basilisk? For there is a mouse in this room, and if your looks kill that animal, we shall be sure of the rest, for it may be multum in parvo." That's a Latin phrase that means much and little, and I think Jack's being very sensible to test his lady's powers before just letting her go up against a giant. The experiment was made in an instant, and the princess, her eyes and whole body became so bright that it was even dazzling to her husband, and the mouse no sooner beheld her but burst with a prodigious crack. Then the ring was turned again, and all wishes were in the prince's power. He immediately slipped through the keyholes of doors and narrow crannies, till he came to a large gallery, where several thousand young ladies were tied up like calves a fatting, and bemoaning their hard case. "Alas, dear prince," say they, "tomorrow early shall we be broiled and crushed between the giant Gogmagog's monstrous teeth, if you do not save us, and there are 10,000 knights below in as bad a condition." "You are then all safe," says the prince, "for the giant will be destroyed as soon as the sun rises, and I shall then take possession of all my dominions." He had no sooner said this, but he released the ladies from their bridles, and summoned the princess's virgins to attend them with such necessaries as they wanted. Then he whisked through the cracks and keyholes till he reached the place where the knights were confined, and they, like the ladies, were tied up to their good behavior. Tied up to their good behavior? Does that mean what I think it does? And were moreover restrained the use of their hands, which he soon changed to their satisfaction, and gave them the assistance of his pages with the promise to release them the next morning. Then were the rooms where these prisoners of both sexes were kept illuminated, and furnished with every refreshing liquor, while the prince returned to his lady, and related what had passed. The day no sooner broke, but up got the prince and princess, and walking into a bower refreshed themselves with some fruits. And the giant appeared with a sword in his hand. Says he with an hoarse voice, "Thou prince of pity, this moment you die, and the next instant I will solace myself in the delights of thy princess." The prince and princess immediately got from their seats, and while the prince was turning his ring toward the north, the giant hit him a thundering stroke with his sword, but he might as well have hit a rock of diamonds as wound the prince, for by this time the ring was in a proper station, and the princess was changed into a cockatrice or basilisk. The giant at this gave a great groan, fell on his knees, trembled, and fell down dead. Then there was a great shout in the castle. The doors flew open. The knights and ladies sallied forth to congratulate their highnesses, and proclaimed them as their sovereigns. They became their vassals, and attended them in their delightful palace and royalty in the most perfect happiness. And so far for enchantment, which some old women first set on foot to amuse children, and is now finished by the author, with no other view but to assure his readers that enchantment proceeds from nothing but the chit-chat of an old nurse or the maggots in a madman's brain. I really like that one. It was earthy. I wouldn't read it to little kids, but it's a good time. I could see some grown-ups gathered around the fire at Christmas time after the kids have gone to bed, having a really good laugh at that one. Maybe it's cold and snowy outside. I mean, the weather's quite opposite right now. It's a pleasant, beautiful evening. The stars are finally coming out. Have you ever heard that version of Jack and the Beanstalk before? I mean, you're probably more familiar with the one that was first published in the 19th century and has been very sanitized and moralized and is meant to, provide guidance to children, which is fine, but doesn't always make for a very fun story. At any rate, let me know if there are other fairy tales that you're interested in learning more about, or if you've got suggestions. And as always, thanks for listening.